All right, we are live for our 20th episode of Connect the Dots. Our idea of a web tech talk show. Thanks everyone for making time in your day and joining on whatever channel you are subscribing to here. I believe we're on LinkedIn Live, Instagram, and Facebook. So we talk about tech. We welcome questions. We modeled the show after the car guys on NPR. We love that idea. People could just call in and ask questions, and somehow the guys at the other end of the line would come up with some answers. And if they couldn't, they did their best to get some answers. But one thing that we do is we have a special guest every show. And celebrating our 20th episode, we have an amazing guest, Roger Williams. He is from Kinsta. He's the community manager there. And we're going to get right into it. I just wanted to get a shout out to Natalie and Marie who are producing the show. If you do have any questions, feel free to post them in any of the channels on LinkedIn or Facebook, and we've got a chat channel open where we'll do our best to answer you. But hey, this is a really cool pleasure. Thanks, Roger, for joining us. Maybe kick things off and tell us a little bit about yourself. We've been talking for a while about hikes and bikes and trails and things, but with a technology bent, I know you've got a lot to share with us coming from Kinsta. Yeah, tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure, absolutely. Chris, thanks for having me here on the show. And, just a quick little bit about myself. I've been at Kinsta now for 5 years. Started in the migrations team, ran the client experience team for a little bit, did some sales, and then we created this community manager position so that I can be kind of this conduit between the company and the customers and the community and whatnot. We're big WordPress managed host. And so there's a large community there to connect with and just make sure we're hearing what people are wanting and needing. Before that, I kind of ran my own little one-man agency for about 9 years, building WordPress sites and doing online marketing. And then before that, I worked for some different telecom and hosting companies. But I'm just super excited to be here. This is going to be a fun conversation.
Oh, that's awesome. I run a small agency myself, and we're kind of agnostic to platforms and technologies. And it's really nice to get someone representing a bit of the WordPress experience. We've just happens to be the last kind of bunch of guests have been a little bit more within the headless community. And I'd love just to maybe kick things off and to set some of the stage. A lot of the folks that tune into the show now or listen later on are CMOs or kind of marketing folks that inevitably get tasked with large digital projects that involve making choices on platforms and hosting environments, and maybe some things that are kind of, amongst all of the things they got to do are a little bit technically need a little bit of demystifying. But maybe if you want to share, just a little bit about your take on WordPress, and maybe as it applies to the enterprise, it's kind of who we're speaking to. But yeah, what's happening in that space these days?
Sure. Yeah. So, WordPress has been around for over 21 years now. It's an open source project. Started off as a blogging tool and then kind of morphed into becoming a CMS. There's argument in the CMS community about all of that, but there's a lot of people that are using WordPress as a CMS. And it's an exciting platform to work in, I think, because it's open source, which means if you want, you can go in and look at all the code and you can connect with the community and give them feedback about features. And, if there's a security issue, you can bring that up and to the actual person that works on it. And with that community, there just becomes a lot of enthusiasm for the product. There's a lot of tutorials. There's a lot of people helping each other out, learning the product, making it better. And I think, when it comes to the enterprise aspect of WordPress, we're seeing a lot more interest and a lot more surge, especially in the last 10 plus years, as the product has matured and as it started to focus more on the needs of the enterprise, right? And I think one of the reasons that we start using content management systems, right, was because we wanted the customers to be able to go in and make changes to the website. You know, having your developer go in and make every single change to the site, it's not only costly, but it takes a lot of time. And with the internet, we want to be able to move quickly. And with WordPress, there's always been that focus on creating a solution that makes it really easy for anybody to log in, make edits, hit publish, and be done. And as we've seen in the most recent iteration of WordPress has been this push with the block editor. And the block editor allows the customer or the user, the end user, more flexibility in terms of the types of content that they're able to edit and make changes to on the site. And so I think it's just really exciting. And I think from an enterprise perspective, if you're not considering WordPress, you're potentially missing a really big place to play around in.
Mm. Hey, can I just kind of take you back a step? And I think the term open source may mean different things to different people. I know that there's a common understanding of what that is, but could you maybe just kind of set that from the beginning? What is open source and what's its value?
Sure. Wow. So I definitely want to make sure I preface that I am not a definitive expert on open source. There's a lot of great books out there. I would recommend everybody go back and read. There's a book called The Cathedral and the Bazaar. It's from Eric Raymond. I think it came out in 98, 99. And it was really interesting. When I originally think about that book, I think of the Cathedral being closed source systems, and then the Bazaar is open source. But actually, Eric was talking about two different approaches to the open source community. And the Cathedral being, hey, there's gatekeepers, and it's very set in terms of how the code comes into the code base. And with the Bazaar, it's much more wide open, much more fluid about people coming in and participating in the project. And so that just shows you how multifaceted open source software can be. There's a ton of different licenses. There's the GPL, there's MIT. There's a lot of different ways to set it up. But at the end of the day, kind of the core tenet as I see it for open source software is that you are allowing anybody to come in and review the code and also participate in building the code. And that's a really big departure from how software was done, before. And I mean, open source has been around really since like the 80s, maybe 70s with, Unix and GNU and Emacs and all of these programs that really hardcore developers are using, right? That are, running all the web servers. Linux is, one of the most famous open source projects. And the exciting aspect of creating software in the open like that is that you get just so many more viewpoints coming in and sharing their expertise and their thoughts. And whereas with a closed software system, let's say like a Microsoft, you're limited to the employees of Microsoft working on that. And while it's a massive company and there's thousands and thousands of people working on it, with open source, it's, you can have hundreds of thousands of people working on it. And the people that are working on an open source project are coming at it from a passion because it's generally a volunteer situation, right? They're working on that on their own time. There's a lot of people that get sponsored by companies to work on it, but for the most part, it's volunteer run. And so it means you have people that are really genuinely interested in the success of that project. And that's what you see in the WordPress project is you see just a lot of enthusiasm. There's a lot of people that have been with the project for 21 years. There's a lot of new people that come into the project, and it's just really exciting. So I don't know exactly if I answered the question there, but maybe we started digging in.
I'm better off for it for sure. I think when we were chatting before we went live, you mentioned something like 40% of the internet is on WordPress, or you might kind of correct me there, but that's a lot of WordPress power. And I think what Kinsta is doing, or at least the way you described it to me, is that organization has really set itself up to support WordPress on the enterprise. And I don't know if you maybe want to talk about what that means, because I think there's one school of thought that, WordPress equals free, cheap, and cheerful, which can get people thinking maybe that's not the right solution for enterprise. But as you know, I want to do a bit of education and sharing what Kinsta is doing to really show how it's kind of locked down that service, I guess, around the enterprise and WordPress.
Sure, absolutely. So yeah, kind of circling back real quick about open source, right? There's this concept of free. And I think what's important is the phrase that's always thrown out there is that it's free as in beer, which means you can get the recipe for beer, right? But to make beer, you have to spend money and buy resources to do that. And so with WordPress, you have a similar situation. The code, you can go to wordpress.org right now and download the code for WordPress. And it's right there. But you're not going to do anything with that code unless you put it on a server somewhere and connect that to the internet. And so that's where a hosting company like Kinsta comes in. And we go even a step further where we're managing those servers, which means whether you're using, in our case, we use Nginx, but you might use Apache, but we use Nginx for the web server. There's PHP for the programming, MySQL for the database. And these are all additional pieces of software that Kinsta manages for you so that you can stay focused on the WordPress project that you're running. And we'll even help, a bit with the WordPress, but we're not developers. So we do have a scope of support, but we specialize in WordPress. So everything that we're building and setting up is optimized to make sure that WordPress is running. I think from the enterprise perspective, as you're asking about, what's important for enterprise that we've found is, reliability, speed, and then security. And so those are three things that we focus on extensively. So from a reliability perspective, we're running everything on Google Cloud's platform. So we've got, the ability to go into any of their data centers around the globe. So depending on your regulatory compliance needs, we can put you in the geographic location that you need to be. From a performance perspective, we've also plugged everything into Cloudflare's CDN and DDoS protection. So you're getting performance and security there. And then, one of the big pieces of the security puzzle is auditing Kinsta. And are we as individuals working at Kinsta being security conscious? And so that's where SOC 2 compliance and ISO 27001 compliance, these all come in to make sure that we're operating in a way that is protecting our customers' data to ensure, they don't need to worry about that, basically.
Cool. Good way to put it. Just 1 second here. I can't see anymore. We just got a question coming in from Natalie. Roger, what do you tell clients about ownership and security concerns when it comes to using open source WordPress for enterprise project? I guess you can kind of take that a bunch of different ways, but how does that unfold?
Yeah, I mean, so the really cool thing about WordPress from an ownership perspective is that you have total ownership. That I think is another aspect of open source that people should be aware of is when you have a WordPress project, all the code that's in there is now yours. And so you're not at the whims necessarily of a Microsoft who's decided to go a different direction with the project. You can stay with what you've got. And then when like the database, you have complete ownership of that database. So ownership is an interesting conversation to have. And maybe I'm jumping ahead just a little bit, but when it comes to talking about AI, specifically LLMs are important based on the data that they're trained on. And so if you own all of your data, you now have the choice of whether or not you want it to go into an LLM, and what ways you want it to be used in that. So that's something to keep in mind from ownership perspective. From security concerns, I think this ties back into the number you were talking about earlier, where, depending on who you're talking to, about 40% of all the websites on the internet are using WordPress to power them, which is massive. That's a lot of websites. And so I think something to kind of consider that with is towards like Windows versus Mac from a security perspective. Windows is kind of seen as less secure, but but the reason for that is it's a larger attack area, right? There's more people using Windows. And so that means more hackers are focusing on that platform. And I think you have the same thing with WordPress. Just because there's so many more WordPress websites, it makes sense for these people, and I'm not advocating for hackers in any way, but it makes sense for them to focus on the larger market. And so that's, I think, where some of the security concern comes up when I talk to people about WordPress. But WordPress as itself is very secure, especially the core. The core code that is built around WordPress is very security conscious. Where it becomes fun is with WordPress, there's the ability to create plugins. And so it's great because you can create plugins, but it's also not great because anybody can create a plugin. And so as a user of WordPress, you need to make sure you're vetting what plugins you're utilizing. Because there's a whole marketplace of free plugins where you can just go and grab whatever you want, but you don't know who that developer is. And so that's something you want to make sure that you're just spending a little bit of time doing your due diligence, especially if you're working with any developer or agency. Especially an agency will always be good about verifying, hey, what plugins are we using, making sure that they're secure, and keeping everything good and secure for you.
And does Kinsta, the company, to what level do you guys get involved in auditing plugins or vetting, or is that kind of user's choice? But you've got the project in case it completely goes down or needs to get reverted, backed up, that kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah. So at Kinsta, we have a 24/7 malware team who is constantly monitoring a bunch of things. So we're monitoring our customer sites. We're also monitoring the larger marketplace of plugins. And there's a lot of different security services out there that write reports and notify us, hey, this plugin has a vulnerability. And so we will work to notify our customers, hey, by the way, this plugin has a vulnerability. We highly recommend that you update it. And, in some cases, if you've been hacked, we'll definitely let you know and work with you to clear up that hacking, right, or the malware that's on there. In a lot of cases, we just go ahead and do it for you, and once we've got your permission. But security and malware and these vulnerability issues are something that we're definitely always focused on and working as much as we can with our clients. One thing to note, when you migrate onto Kinsta using our migration team, one of the final steps they do is actually run our malware scanner on your site. And, 9 times out of 10, we'll just go ahead and clean it up, and we'll let you know, hey, by the way, we found this, and here's the actions we took. And we'll give you a list of, hey, you should go ahead and reset your passwords, and we'll give you a list of actions to do. But that just by itself, like, we want to make sure that as soon as you're on our platform, you're malware free. And we actually even do a malware free guarantee. So once you're on the platform and we've determined that you're not using nulled plugins or anything kind of below board, we'll go ahead and make sure that we clean everything up for you and keep you secure.
That sounds cool. You were speaking about enterprise customers. Are you at liberty to talk about some of the larger organizations that happen to be on WordPress and maybe some of our listeners don't know about?
I wish I had a better list of enterprise customers. Enterprise customers are notoriously tight-lipped and prefer to, kind of stay out of the limelight. There is a really great site that I'm aware of, southeastasiaglobe.com.
Oh man, I've heard of that. That's one of our babies. Yeah. And thanks for the plug. I've heard through the grapevine that maybe NASA, Disney, and perhaps some of the New York Times properties might be running on WordPress somewhere here and there. Don't quote me on it, but
absolutely. So as far as like in general in the WordPress, in general on who's running WordPress, we've got the largest organizations, the names you've just mentioned, plus many others are using WordPress in a variety of ways. I think again, something that's important to talk about is that since it's open source, the malleability of WordPress is wide open, and you can, depending on the developers you've got, you can make it work in almost any situation imaginable and with any other type of program. If you need to connect it with your ERP system and, keep things running smoothly and share content to various screens, let's say you're a restaurant, large enterprise restaurant, you've got menu screens, menu tablets. You can use WordPress to power that content, across a variety of solutions.
Cool. I am sure there's a few colleagues and friends that spend most of their time in the headless world. Headless as in kind of decoupled architecture, a content platform where you separate your content essentially from the presentation of it. WordPress is making some strides in that direction too. And maybe even with the Gutenberg system, it's been a little bit headless for a while. You can talk about a little bit what's going on there?
Yeah, again, prefacing, I'm not a developer, so I may say things incorrectly here, but the API system for WordPress has been worked on extensively for many, many years now. And so the ability to decouple your content from the back end and have it then served to a variety of front ends is not a problem at all for WordPress. And again, the block editor makes that, again, even easier, because now your development team can go in, and if you need specific blocks created that then are distributed to a variety of outputs, again, you have that control. You don't need to reach out to the WordPress core team to create a new block. You can just go ahead and start creating new blocks right now.
Interesting. And you mentioned like some kind of flexibility with WordPress, and I think maybe just a bit of a chat that may highlight the idea that you can get away from, strictly pages and posts. You can really create your own environment from an authoring perspective as well. Have you seen any kind of cool stuff going on in that department?
I don't get to sit in and look at the projects as much as anymore, because now I'm, in hosting, it's more just, hey, is the site running?
Right.
Is the big question. But I do talk with a lot of enterprise agency partners about different projects that they're working on. And I've heard about some different like cruise ship companies that are utilizing WordPress to deliver the content into different kiosks and different ways. I've heard that, Disney and ABC are using it extensively to deliver content in a variety of ways. And, we're talking about their actual shows. So it's got the power out there, and there's been a lot of movement to really prove and show that WordPress can work in enterprise lately. And the Scale Consortium is a group of agencies, enterprise agencies, that have really come together recently to really promote that. And I think that that's a big project that's happening right now, is just making people aware that, hey, WordPress works for enterprise, and it's not just for your kid's blog or whatever. Like, you can actually use this for really substantial projects. It's being used for very substantial projects. NASA, there was a big presentation over a year ago at WordCamp US about how NASA is utilizing WordPress to drive massive amounts of content across their platforms.
Cool. And you just mentioned WordCamp. I think you just got back from a WordPress get together. What were kind of the key highlights? Anything kind of top of mind that really blew your mind, or things that, I don't know, were interesting?
Yeah, absolutely. So this year, WordCamp US this year, they had the first time they did a showcase day, which was really cool. They had people from Disney and a bunch of other companies. They had a lot of agency partners presenting. And from the nerdier side of things, there's a newer feature called the Block Bindings API, cool, which is a super technical sounding name, but basically it allows you to pull metadata from different posts and easily put it into different parts of the site without having to use any code. And so for the marketers, in the crowd listening, I think this is the type of stuff that should get you really excited, is understanding that the back end of WordPress is very user-friendly. There's no need for you to, if you're using the block editor now, there's really no need for you to ever look at any code and be able to do a wide variety of tasks. And the block bindings API has just in WordPress 6.7 just came out last week. And now there's actually a user interface aspect in the WordPress dashboard for adding your metadata from different posts to different areas of your website, again, with no code. And so that's some really exciting stuff. Geez, I'm just drawing a little bit of a blank all of a sudden, but
I got you. So I've got a WordPress site for myself, for my personal blog. And I just saw something the other day after an upgrade, and I think it said Genesis blocks. Is that something did I see the word Genesis in there?
Genesis blocks, that's a theme, as well as a plugin that's available. So the Genesis theme has been around for a long time, very popular. And this, again, kind of brings you back into understanding how the WordPress ecosystem kind of works. So you have the WordPress core. That's the software that does like the majority of what's happening with WordPress, building pages, posts, the interface. But then you have themes, which is the front end of the site. And then you have plugins, which just add more functionality. And plugins can run the gamut from, helping you to create new blocks, to creating custom post types, to, something as simple as, hey, I just want to put a banner on the top of the site. And instead of coding that, you can utilize a plugin. So it can definitely get a little tricky when you start digging in, and especially if you're digging into an existing site that maybe you don't have all the familiarity around of how it's been set up. But those are really the three kind of things to look for. There's WordPress core. So right now, the most current version is 6.7. And then you have your theme. So you have one theme active at a time. And then the theme is manipulatable, either with non-code, you can make changes to certain themes, but then also you can bring a developer in and they can go crazy. They can create a custom theme for you. The sky's the limit there. And then with plugins, unfortunately, there's no limit to how many plugins you can install, and that can cause some issues. Again, if you're in the enterprise space and you're working with an enterprise type agency, usually that's not a problem you're going to run into. They're going to be very mindful of that. But if you're just getting started with WordPress, you do want to watch out for the scope creep of adding too many plugins and getting a little crazy there. You can run into some performance issues. So something just to keep in mind there.
Gotcha. Well, we were speaking before about how fast time goes by. I just wanted to get a little bit of focus back on Kinsta itself and the company that you represent, and make sure that I do a great job of letting everyone know what you're up to, what the roadmap is. If you could talk to us about anything new coming down the road, how can people connect with you? I understand there might be a Black Friday, something going on. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kinsta.com is the website to come to. If you want to contact me, it's roger@kinsta.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'd love to talk to people there. There's a Black Friday sale going on right now, 50% off. So I think if you do monthly, it's 50% off for the first 6 months. If you do an annual plan, it's 50% off for the year. So pretty substantial deals going on there. But, in general, we're continuing to refine the product, focus on WordPress. We've also got some other products that are non-WordPress focused. So let's say you do need to do a decoupled WordPress site. We have the technology available so that you can do the back-end WordPress and then have the front end in React or whatever else you're working in on our application hosting. We have a database hosting and static sites as well. So we can really cover a lot of different aspects of your project. I think it's just an exciting time. I love working on the internet. I've been doing it now for well over 20 years, and I'm just amazed every day at the new stuff that's happening. And I think as we're moving into more of this AI-driven world, having an open source aspect to your projects is going to allow you to retain a certain level of control. And so I think that's an important thing for people to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And if I forgot to ask you something that is really important, we're going to follow up in the comments here afterwards, because I know we just ran out of time. But my goal was to really share, what Roger's doing, what Kinsta's doing, really supporting WordPress on enterprise, and how valuable that is to the overall community. Great to hear your ideas, and thank you. We're going to sign off. I just wanted to thank everyone who took a moment out of their day to listen in and ask some questions. We'll be posting, this kind of turns into a podcast and a YouTube video, so that'll be available to friends and family out there. Also, just a shout out, and again, thanks to Natalie and Marie for producing the show. Roger, it was a super pleasure. Thanks for making the 20th episode awesome.
Yeah, man.
And we'll be back in a couple of weeks. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great day out there.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris.
Bye.